Hello, everybody. Hello, this is Dom Savini again. Welcome back to Lesson 6, our final lesson that we'll be talking with you about the analysis of our financial reporting model, the financial statements, and how this information sharing should be beneficial for all users, principally our key decision makers, of course, Congress, senior DoD officials, and the general public, right? So as we do this, let me go ahead and get our presentation together. And if I do this correctly again, we'll come up with a decent video. I understand that one of the videos, I think it was the first one, lesson 4, there might have been some slight buffering. So I apologize for that, but it's the technology. I'm trying to control as much as I can, but there's only so much this professor could do, right? The technology takes over. Okay, well, anyway, this is the last, as I said, of our 3-session discussion. Again, these are my views in Lesson 6. The board speaks officially through its pronouncements. Everything you hear here is unofficial, right? Certainly, it's my personal opinion based upon 40 years of government service. A significant amount has been, let me say, almost half of my government service has been servicing DoD in one way or another, at least half, if not more. If I counted all my FACEAB interactions with DoD, it would be way over 20 years of working with the agency, with the department, I should say. Okay, learning objectives. 4 through 6, we've covered them. Now, there's a little bit of an overlap with learning objective C between lessons 5 and today, where we're going to be talking about this information, right? This maturity of information, this gradation of information vis-a-vis the value of information, right? It's like anything else. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, right? It's very subjective, and that's part of the problem. Remember, FACEAB sets generally accepted accounting principles, and our financial statements are considered general purpose financial statements. Now, even though they're geared towards the executive branch of the federal government, they're still considered general purpose because each federal agency, as you know, is different. We all operate differently. We have different constituencies, both on the Hill and on Main Street and on Wall Street. And if you were to ask all of the constituents what they'd like to see in a financial report, my God, you would have a plethora and a mishmash of requests. There's no way you can satisfy everyone. So the statements are general purpose. And this is a good segue into our discussion regarding how do we improve our financial reporting model at DoD, let's say. Now, the reason it's an important segue is because if we can't satisfy discrete users, then who are we satisfying, right? So some would argue that the financial reporting model is of limited value because it doesn't answer everyone's specific questions or concerns. For example, I mentioned, I think in an earlier video, that many of our focus groups on the financial reporting model wanted to know what the cost of a war was. Now, these are citizens. We did this in consultation with GAO, who are experts in interviewing people. And folks just want to know, hey, what's it costing? And they then can figure out what it's costing the taxpayer, if you will, maybe down even to a per capita basis to fund different wars and engagements. So, are we providing that information? That's debatable. I don't know. Some might argue yes, others certainly would argue no, that we're not giving, on the statement of net cost, for example, a breakdown of what each military engagement is costing the taxpayer. So that's objective C. We'll then be talking about improvements what could be some improvements that we can make to the financial report. And for that, we're going to be using the DoD fiscal year 23 financial statement, specifically management's discussion and analysis, which is a summation or an encapsulation of the financial statements. Every agency is supposed to take a breather and kind of explain to people, hey, we're showing you all these financial statements, all these numbers, got all these notes, all these schedules. And what it really means is this. That's what the MD&A is kind of, it's management's assessment of the financial reports for that year. So I'm going to take you there. So if you haven't done so already, there is a link in one of the slides when we get there to the fiscal year 2023 DoD financial statements. You can find it on the comptroller's website. I want you to find that. You can pause, and then go to page 9 through 49. That section is what I'll kind of talk through some of it. I'll reference the page numbers. I won't put it up on the screen. I want you to kind of follow it on your own, maybe. And the reason I don't want to put it up on the screen is I'm afraid I'm going to goof something up, and I don't want to goof anything up for you. I'm wasting your time. I know it's precious. Okay, so those are our overall learning objectives. And today's outline, we're going to help you distinguish between material, whether it's raw data, information, or knowledge. Just kind of talk you through that, getting you to think about how the, even the Treasury fiscal maturity model can help us graduate, raw data from kindergarten, let's say, into elementary school, and then into middle school, high school, and college, right? Maybe it's a poor metaphor, but you understand where we're going with this. Then again, we're going to look at, and this is where you need to take an assessment of the unit you're working in, the division, department, office. Look at that maturity model and kind of come up with your own recommendations or own ideas as to how to improve the process and your deliverable. Now, listen, we can joke about it because a lot of you would say, well, if they would just get us a new supervisor, right? Someone who knows what they're talking about, or a new SES, or gosh, I got my colleague spends half the day shopping online or going to eBay, get rid of them and hire somebody. You're right. Oftentimes it is a people problem. I mean, but you don't treat it per se as a people problem. You look at the overall process, and if you have individuals that are failing, you try to, through training, counseling, working with them. Now, if you don't have that authority or that responsibility, there's not much you can do. So you focus on yourself here. When you think about the Treasury model and how to improve your own department's operations, think about it from your own point of view, not so much about how Dick is doing a bad job or Sally's doing a bad job. Don't worry about them. Put the blinders on, make it introspective. The second aspect of the second outline objective here today is to look at it from a DoD point of view and say, what can DoD do, as an entity to improve its financial reporting, right? So you take it from a micro to a macro level, and, it's going to be interesting what you come up with. And just to give it some thought, I mean, is it the fact that we don't have a cadre of dedicated financial management professionals? Is the burnout rate too high? Are we just, trashing these people and they just can't wait to get out and find another job because it's so difficult to work, Is it a competency problem? Are we not training them on the right systems or to do the right things? Is it a leadership problem? I've heard people tell me on the consulting side, DoD's financial management issue is a leadership problem. They're dead set saying it. Now, they might have self-serving interests to say that because on the consulting side, as many of you know, they like to feed their partners into DoD and they slip them in. And you understand, at least when you're in DC, how the Pentagon works, or maybe doesn't work. It works for a lot of people, right? Certainly has been working for consultants and auditors, I guess, from a profitable point of view, but that's personal opinion, you know. But hopefully, ultimately, bringing in talent from the outside might be a solution to a stagnant management or siloed department. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. So think about it from that point of view. What can we do to elevate the department's maturity and financial reporting efficacy, right? And the last thing we're going to do is talk about ethical issues. These, again, will be introspective. I'll show you what the standards say for practicing accountants, but really at the end of the day, it's on you. If you can tolerate a little bit of lying on your timesheet, guess what? You can tolerate maybe lying somewhere else. And you might not call it lying. I'm just going to be straight up and tell you, if you're mischarging time, you're lying. Okay, it's that simple. Now we might say, oh, it's a little white lie. It's no big deal. Well, in some cases, when I teach ethics, for example, to save someone's life or to protect someone, a lie might be the right thing to do. Okay. Generally speaking, if you were raised in a home where they talked about morality and morals, you were probably taught right from wrong. Lying is not good. Telling the truth is good. Now, I've had students in class tell me, their parents, and I've had two students basically tell me this from two different classes on ethics, that their parents basically told them, you lie to get ahead. It's a dog-eat-dog world. If you don't do it, someone else is going to do it. They're not better than you. You go out there and you get your fair share of that pie. And if you got to lie to get the pie, you do it. And that's how some people are raised. Now, it cuts across all demographics. It's not an economic or social status thing. It's a cultural thing. It's a mindset thing. And we see it today. Sadly, I won't go into anything, but you pick the venue, you pick the industry. There's failures at the very top down to the bottom. Okay. So enough said about that. We'll get into that a little bit more. But those are going to be the items we're going to talk to you about today. Okay. All right. Just as a review, the U.S. Constitution's clause. Remember, from time to time, and it's in blue, I've marked it in blue, the government, is supposed to provide a regular statement of account that shows the receipts and expenditures of all public money. That's what we're basically talking about. The constitutional requirement to do this, to be financially transparent. What have you taxed the people for? And what did you spend that money on actually? Okay, kind of simple. Now remember, this requirement began about 130 years before the federal income tax code was ever dreamed up. That was a fairly new thing, in the early 20th century. Until then, the government financed itself on excise taxes, tariffs, duties, customs fees. It was very limited. The revenue base was quite limited. Now it's, blown up to the point where I'm sure you all look forward to April 15th and your filing of your income tax returns. Okay, so that's where this is going. And we'll start looking at now, what is it from a user's point of view that they need to see, or we believe they need to see, to make decisions. In economics, you're taught that we have a scarce amount of resources in the world, right? Petroleum oil, natural gas, diamonds, steel, minerals, whatever. And in a capitalistic system, free market system, those resources should go to the most productive people. That's why things like communism, the Soviet Union failed. They were a controlled economy. They didn't like free markets. So they allocated resources to really inefficient production warehouses and facilities. And ultimately, they told farmers not to grow things and people starved. Happened also in, I believe, China, Pol Pot, I think that was Cambodia. Wherever there was communism and the control of markets, we had very horrible, I mean, famines were the least of the problems, right? There are other things that happened beyond the context of this course. But be that as it may, those scarce resources need to be allocated, okay? Well, how will a decision maker, such as Wall Street, investors, pension funds, insurance companies, Congress, or even citizens like you and me, how are we going to make decisions on where those resources should go? Well, based on information that we can rely on, right? So now keep in mind the most basic information that the accounting technician is inputting into their Oracle system, right? Their PeopleSoft system, their ERP system, QuickBooks, all right, is raw data, which is the bottom of the pyramid, okay? Very raw number crunching, debit figures, credit figures, okay? And as you go up the pyramid, where you begin now, after your data collection, you go to organizing that data. Maybe now you're using an ACK or chart field information to group that information by, you know, the color of money, the fiscal year involved, right? The department, the 4-digit object class code down the line, right? You're now organizing and summarizing that data. You're elevating it from raw data to information, almost like taking raw data, raw materials in a manufacturing operation, putting some touch labor on it and converting it, right? You're doing the same thing with data now. So you go up the pyramid, and then hopefully you've got time, personnel, and resources and expertise to analyze that data. Start looking at it, you know, take a look at the chart field information, start doing some sorting, some analysis, comparison to prior years or to budget amounts or other benchmarks. And it may reveal things like, wow, we seem to be spending a whole lot of money in this area, maybe not enough here. Or, wow, we're getting a lot more revenues than we expected here. We're not sure why. Let's investigate. And then you begin synthesizing that data, you know, purifying it, putting it into maybe graphs, bar charts, pie charts, and then you elevate it to the highest form of information, which we call knowledge, right? Insight, wisdom. So now the people at the very top, right? Hopefully the citizens can make decisions on where those resources should go, where those tax dollars should go. Now remember, everyone's got a different vested interest, right? As we talked about earlier. So financial statements, which are general purpose, has to try to satisfy, in general, all the different constituents that are concerned about the allocation of these scarce resources, okay? So think about it now. Not all users necessarily need knowledge. They might just be happy with raw data. I'll give you an example. On our land project, I had a professor from the University of, I believe it was Kentucky. Could have been Tennessee. I always got the two mixed up. But he was from down there. I call it down south. It's probably not real south, but it's south enough for me. I'm from New Jersey, so anything south of like Newark is south. Well, not really. Anything south of South Jersey is really south. But anyhow, um, he was a scientist, a data scientist, and a researcher. He worked on grants from the Department of Interior, in particular, to analyze land. He preferred raw acreage information. If we could have given him in the financial report raw acreage by state, for example, he could use it as control totals in his formulas and in his research. He would rather have that raw acreage information by parcel, preferably, than have that land expressed in either historical cost or fair market value. That was the scientist's point of view. Raw data was good enough for him because he then took it, transformed it to information and knowledge using his algorithms, his math, his statistics, his magic crystal ball. All right, you get it? Then you had business consultants on the task force for land, and land acreage, that means nothing to me. I want the fair market value of that land. And I want to know if it's being productively used, because maybe I'm going to write to my senator and congressman or congresswoman and say, look, take that land and sell it, and let's use it for something. Or let's take it and develop it and use it for something else than the federal government's just sitting on it. So they were kind of higher up on the pyramid looking for that knowledge or more informative type presentation. So, folks, not all users need or want anyone in particular. General purpose statements can, provide all, let's say, these three main levels of information. So, and I think that's what makes it so hard, right? That it's a general purpose statement. Users are going to need different types of information. And here we are stuck as accountants, financial preparers, trying to satisfy everybody. You know what Julius Caesar said. Someone who tries to satisfy everyone satisfies no one and just garners enemies. So keep that in mind. Don't feel bad that you can't always satisfy everybody. We just can't. It's just the way life is. And in financial reporting, we know that's the case. Okay. We talked about concepts 2, I believe, last time we met, or maybe lesson 4. And we talked about the balance sheet, right? Statement in time, assets and liabilities, net position. Then we talked about the flow statements, how they kind of contribute to our net position, with the exception of the statement of custodial activities, because that one there, we're collecting money on behalf of somebody else. So that doesn't become either an asset or a liability to us. We're just holding that money as a steward. So that flow statement's off balance sheet, right? An off balance sheet flow statement. But the statement of net costs, the statement of changes in net position directly tie back to and relate to the balance sheet. Statement of budgetary resources, we talked about that being the basis for most agencies' primary source of income or revenue, which is federal appropriations, those tax dollars. We talked about performance measures and the flirting that the government's had with that back and forth, and it seems to be a real problem area, trying to marry performance information to financial information for a host of reasons, different systems, different periods of reporting, just the complexity of, trying to just define program. There's no definition for program in federal government. So what you might call a program at DOD or a certain bureau or agency at DOD might be different than another. And so you have a lot of problems, I think. And then, of course, personally speaking, one of the biggest problems I felt, and I fell into it, was that there's a bias against performance reporting. Unless it's helping me get more budget money and making me look good, I don't want anybody to know what my real metrics are. Sometimes, even if I'm doing well, I don't want anyone to know, because, that old saying, familiarity breeds contempt kind of thing. You know, people get jealous. Believe me, as a program manager, I saw it. When the budget season hits and we got to start our planning, people that you're having coffee with, having lunch with, are going to come out and tell you, hey, look, I'm going to be fighting for that money as hard as you, if not harder, you know, and you get into the rivalry, which is a lot of it is good if it's managed well. That tension is good. But sometimes it's not managed so well and people get out of hand. And so I think there's a bias to performance reporting inherently, you know, and unfortunately, I think, listen, we've had HUD now since the early 1970s, maybe if not earlier, and the homelessness problem. And I worked at HUD. Why is it in some ways gotten worse? Why is it that HUD, after all this time, still has significant waiting lines for families? Why is it that they haven't been able to really ferret out the fraud in public housing, Section 8 housing? You know, part of it is, and I'm biased because I work there, so I'll admit it, but I've had people tell me that a person who has lied on their application for public housing has the same right to live in public housing as an honest person waiting in line. When I challenged them, they said, Mr. Savini, you're making a moral judgment. That human being has the same worth as another human being. And I'm like, well, but if that human being lied by telling you they didn't have a job when they did, and they're driving a Mercedes, and you're giving them subsidized housing, and you got a family out there playing by the rules, and they've got no place to live, that's the moral judgment. Yeah, I am making a moral judgment, and I think I'm right to do so. But you know, now you may agree with that program official who was an SES at Maine HUD. I would hope that most people would kind of agree with me that, hey, I don't think lying to get the piece of the pie is fair, you know? And I do think, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get to the ethical portion. I think all of these factors, you know, behavioral factors, ethical factors, systemic issues, lack of, you know, terminology or definitions for things like program, all impede in performance reporting, okay? The last section, concepts 2, tell us would be other information, required supplementary information that we at FASAB say, for example, deferred maintenance and repairs has to be reported. Royalty income on the mineral estate needs to be reported. Notes, but MD&A, management discussion analysis, which remember, you're supposed to have that document called up, or at least at your fingertips. We're going to basically review that casually together. MD&A is critical, okay? So this is our reporting model. These are the statements we're using to try to convey information, either raw information, more mature, or actual knowledge to the different users that read these statements, okay? Here we go. There's the link in case you need it. That's what the report should look like. And let's take a look at, in general, what we're seeing with our MD&A. I'm going to try to exit out of here. Let's see. And call up the page if I can. I'm not sure if I can. I don't know why this is not. There it is. I'm hoping this doesn't mess us up, folks. Okay. Okay. MD&A. I hope you can see the screen here. Pages 9 or 10 through 49. Okay. Again, management summation of the financial sections that follow and the other information naturally. I'm just going to scroll. You get the Secretary of Defense gives his assessment, okay, of what the year looks like. We won't have to spend, we don't have time to really get into it in depth. But I want to just give you an overview of MD&A. Mission overview, talk about the organizational structure of DoD, resources, its emergency response funding, which were separate, probably supplemental appropriations, performance review, forward-looking information, like what do we see happening in the future, financial highlights, audit review or audit overview, and analysis of systems and controls and legal compliance. I kind of want to just look at the financial highlights section beginning on page 36. Here, again, we take a look at the balance sheet and net in our program costs. They actually give us both here. Gross program costs, remember, less earned revenue, and they give you the net cost of operation for fiscal year 23 and restated fiscal year 22, and they show you increase or decrease. Now, how valuable is this information at a summary level? I don't know. It depends upon the user and what they use that information for. Okay, certainly you put it on a trend line, more than likely it's all going up, right? Maybe earned revenue would be an interesting number. What's going on there over the years? Is it going up, down, stagnant? Okay, now we look at assets, liabilities, net position. We've seen the 170.8 number, remember, when we first met. That's in your MD&A. Now, again, what do the assets tell us? Okay, well, it tells us what we own. Liabilities tell us what we owe. So again, as I pointed out earlier in one of the other lessons, we could sell all of DoD's $3.781 trillion or $1 billion of assets and still not be able to cover the 3.9 that we have as liabilities. So we would still be left with about $170.8 billion in liabilities. So if DoD sold everything, including its Pentagon building, everything, we'd still have a debt. That's what the balance sheet is showing, okay? That's pretty informative, right? Now, I'm going to ask you to identify improvements either to the statement of net costs or the asset or liability section. What improvements could we make? Are there, first of all, let's look at assets. Then we'll go to the statement of net costs in a moment. Are there assets that DoD has that aren't being included? Yeah. The federal government as a whole does not account for what's underneath the dirt and land it owns. So we don't account for the mineral estate, the oil, natural gas, gold, diamond, silver, whatever might be underground. We don't account for it. Now, if we did and put a value on that, that'll make the asset number go up. Then we would not be as illiquid or non-solvent as it looks, right? So another big asset we don't see at the federal government wide is the ability to tax. It's an account receivable or taxes receivable. Some proponents say that's the biggest asset that the federal government should put on its balance sheet, that no matter what, the government will always tax its way out of a problem. And that's tax money comes out of your pocket. Now, there is no political will to show that on the balance sheet as an asset because nobody wants to tax, right? The American people, but they do anyway. Either through taxation or inflation, we're taxed, right? And at the state and local level, they do it through user fees. But be that as it may, nobody wants to show that as an economic resource coming into the government. But that is potential improvement you could suggest, right? That along with the mineral estate. Also, what about intellectual property? DoD's got some great labs, great scientists, great research. A lot of those things could have commercial applicability. But like the government, we tend to give our stuff away, and we don't really capitalize on a lot of the work that we do and get a fair return. But if we did, if we took our intellectual property and put an estimate of its market worth, that might be, something that users would like to see, right? So you can see that we can make enhancements there. On the liability side, for the most part, there are some criticisms maybe about how we might measure some of our liabilities. They're not all at fair market value. But I think by and large, the liabilities are fairly tight. I can't think of anything offhand. Now, some of you have an idea of what might be a liability that we're not accounting for. Um, you know, um, let Dr. Potter or myself know. I mean, it would be interesting, and I can research it. I mean, we don't account for like contingencies, like if next year is going to be a bad tornado or a hurricane year, we don't account for that as a potential because that's more of a contingency. A liability's got to be kind of more foundational, something typically in the past has occurred, right? It's got to be probable and measurable that we're going to pay out. So that covers the balance sheet. Statement of net cost now. Okay, this is a summation, a very condensed summary. But let's see if there's anything else that the balance sheet they're just showing us here, pie charts and graphs, liabilities, pie charts and graph. Statement of net cost. Here we go. The MD&A talks about that major programs. Okay, that's good. You can see the major programs on page 41. I can expand it a little bit. Here, again, let me just back up. These are the major programs. Do we think this is informative enough for users? Military retirement benefits, civil works, military personnel, operations readiness and support, procurement, R&D, T&E, family housing, and military construction. Or do you think users want to see something else? Should they see something else? Should our gross costs be broken out differently? Okay. Now, again, we're looking at DoD wide. If you want to know Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, you could go down to those individual statements, but they're going to probably similarly have very condensed information and not, as we typically see in commercial accounting, either by nomenclature, by expense category, or like we do in not-for-profit accounting by, the various different programs. Here you do, okay? Here you do see it by program. But again, are the programs granular enough, specific enough for the users? That is a good debate, okay? Some people argue that we should tie our statement of net costs to the strategic objectives of the agency. Well, my counter argument is every administration, even if it stays in power, you get like a president reelected, they sometimes change their objectives. So you're going to have a moving target from year to year. You don't have comparability to compare. So I don't personally like that idea. To me, it would be nice if we could define what a program is. I like to do it state and local government, come up with criteria to assess major versus non-major programs and report on the major programs. That's what state and local does. Maybe we should do it at the federal. This is just to get you thinking, you see, just to get you thinking. And let's see. So those are the basic statements. The SBR, Statement of Budgetary Resources, I don't think there's much to be improved here other than using some simple English to explain what's going on. I mean, that needs to be done. There should be a crosswalk to, for example, what does unobligated balances from prior year budget authority mean? Okay, you could say that's an easy one, but that's for us. But what about if you're a high school student or a college student majoring in marketing or basket weaving and you live in Kansas City and you never heard these terms before? You might not know what they mean. Why can't we have a crosswalk to simple English? And use simple terms to explain these things. So the SBR can be improved from that point of view, I think. But again, let me know what you think, or think about it. That's the point about education. Get our minds to think. Okay, so let me go back to our presentation, because I think that really covers the review I wanted to kind of go over with you on the MD&A. Okay, I hope you found that kind of beneficial and helpful. As we look to wrap this up, just before we get to ethics, remember the maturity model. You should be looking at this both at a micro office level and also DoD wide. Spend some time, even if it's 15 minutes, just kind of goof around, figure it out, look at it. Because you might be in a position one day to make a change, and you might want to know where, and you'll be prepared. Or a question might come up. You might be in a meeting with the senior official, and you'll have an answer, and you'll look pretty smart, smarter than maybe what you are, but they won't know that. They'll just say, "Oh, that's one smart cookie," And so think about it. It's nice being a smart cookie every so often. All right. Okay. Ethics. Our last few minutes here, folks, and then I'll cut you loose. Do what you got to do. What is ethics and what does it mean? Very simple. Aristotle basically said, look, it's about becoming a better person, to become virtuous, to become good, because we're not all born that way, or we're all kind of like selfish, self-serving creatures. Sure, we got to go out and hunt to get our food. We got to go out and fight the other caveman to try to get a cave woman and start a cave family. You know what I'm saying? Back to those genetic days and those prehistoric days. People took care of themselves. But as civilization changed, as people's minds grew and societies formed and cave people started shaving, and kind of realizing, hey, look, maybe I don't have to go out and beat up the other caveman to get a cave woman. Maybe if I ask him for his daughter's hand in marriage, I bring a dowry, maybe like some dinosaur meat, something. Maybe then he'll allow me to marry his daughter without me like fighting him and the brothers, So where am I going with this? Well, what I'm basically saying is we've evolved, and Aristotle at that point said, look, ethics, man, makes us better. Let's get away from those instinctual caveman, cavewoman type instincts, right? So the other thing Aristotle said was, look, if you're going to study ethics, and if it's not going to change your life, it's a waste of time. It's kind of what I tell people who go to a religious service. No, and it doesn't matter what religion you are. If you go to your religious service on a Saturday or a Sunday or during the week, and the other 6 days of the week, you do all the things that you're not supposed to be doing, why are you wasting your time? Don't even go to church. Don't even pretend. It is a waste of time, right? Or people that go on these fad diets. Oh, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to do this. But they don't really practice it. They cheat every day. It's okay to maybe have a cheat day once a week, but they cheat every day. But they're paying money to a trainer or a Weight Watchers group. It's like, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. And Aristotle was that way about ethics. If it doesn't make you better, drop it. Okay? Don't waste your time. Very practical man. Now, what does the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants tell us? They're more of a rules-based ethical group, right? They give you some rules, but they're principles that are really behind the rules. They say that we're supposed to have an unswerving commitment to honorable behavior using professional and moral judgments. Sounds good, right? Unswerving commitment. That I get, all right? You're following a process. You're dedicated to trying to be good. And how are you going to be good? By making professional and moral judgments. That's the interesting question. What happens if your professional judgment differs from your moral judgment? You got a dilemma. But at least the AICPA brings it out that you have, as a human being, and they're right, moral ethics, the way you were, grown up, so to speak, educated, and you have professional ethics. So they then list, and I won't go over them all. You have a responsibilities principle. You have a public interest principle. Number 2, that's the most important. You serve the public. You have to honor the public trust, and you got to commit to professionalism. Then you have your integrity principle, right? So you should always apply professionalism in every engagement. Honesty, candor, client confidentiality, etc. Then they go on to talk about objectivity and independence, right? Avoid conflicts of interest, basically. Do care. Don't be sloppy in your work. Follow the right rules, whether they're audit standards or accounting standards or the DoD Financial Management Guide, whatever rules you're supposed to follow, follow, okay? There are shortcuts you can take here and there, sure, but you want to be professional. You don't want to get yourself in trouble. And the scope and nature of your service that you provide. And that all depends on basically making sure you adhere to all the other principles. Because if you don't adhere to all the other 5, you're violating the 6th in essence, okay? So that's the AICPA, rules of the road. Now, if you're an Institute of Internal Auditor, they talk about integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, and competence. Okay, kind of similar, right? Integrity, doing in the dark what you would do in the daylight, or vice versa, right? I think you get what I'm saying. Don't be a hypocrite, objectivity, take your biases, put them aside, understand you got them, look at the evidence fairly, and be objective in your assessments, okay? Now, they don't have independence up there because the Institute of Internal Auditors are comprised of auditors that work for an organization, including the IG. You can't be independent of the organization because they give you the paycheck, but you can be objective. Confidentiality, basically don't go out there and be a blabbermouth, insider information. Don't get yourself in trouble or your organization in trouble. Don't be like the first one to offer up to the news media a story, Now again, whistleblowers have different venues to address concerns. That's beyond the scope of this class. We could talk about that some other time. Competency, again, like the AICPA. Now, as we begin our discussion on ethics or get you thinking about it, behavioral scientists say that only 4% of the U.S. population are sociopaths. These are people with antisocial attitudes, behavior, those lacking a conscience. I could jokingly say it kind of sounds like any 20-year-old I might meet today, right? Always out on the phone, antisocial. Their behavior kind of strange. And if you ask them what's going on in the world, they're like, huh? What? But anyway, joking, of course. If you're a 20-year-old out there, don't be insulted, please. But if only 4% of the U.S. population, that's 1 out of 25 people, are sociopaths. That means 24 out of 25, or 96% of people, they've got feelings, they've got compassion. So why is the world such a screwed up place? Or why is our country such a screwed up place? Now you might say, Professor Savini, that's horrible to say our country's screwed up. You know what I'm saying? We've got problems. Crime, white collar, blue collar, street, boardroom, whatever it is. You got corruption. All the way from the White House, maybe down to even my house. There's corruption, okay? But the question is, if it was only 4% of the people committing those crimes, it wouldn't be as bad as what you see today. So what is it, right, that makes 96% of us kind of contribute to the mess that we're seeing, even on our jobs? Let's look at what two people said at two different times. This British philosopher, John Stuart Mill, in 1867, said, "Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing." Basically, what Mr. Mill was saying was, the reason bad people can get away with stuff is because good people just kind of ignore it and don't care until it hits you. When crime hits you, whether it's a white collar or a blue collar crime, you don't care. Very, very few of us really care, right? Now, if this hurts, that's what it's designed to do. This is designed to make you think, introspective, and grow, right? Now, another great philosopher, really great leader, Dr. King. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. So he said what Mr. Mill said in the 19th century. Dr. King in the 20th century kind of modernized it a bit and said, you good folks ain't saying enough. That's why things like institutional racism, where it really exists. That's why hatred, jealousy, prejudice, crime, everything exists. Two different men, totally different walks of life, two different centuries, two different sets of problems, in a way, said the same thing. And I think we should think about that. And here's how I want you to think about it. Ask yourself this, my fellow students, because I'm a student too, even though I'm a little grown up, more grown up than you, I'm still learning. When was the last time that you saw something that was clearly wrong and you didn't say anything? When was the last time that you're watching your favorite cable news show, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and you were like really, oh yeah, cheering on that talking head because they were lambasting, criticizing the other side, and you were just soaking in it every minute. It just made you so good. All right? Think about it. When was the last time that happened? Or item 3, the third bullet. When was the last time that you made an excuse for criminal activity because it coincided with your politics or your sense of social justice? Now, I'm not going to name specific incidents. You name your own. But I know we've all done it. And I've had to catch myself too and say, if the shoe were on the other foot, what would my response be? And I'll tell you, every time I put that shoe on the other foot, I'm like more balanced. I'm like, oh, no, I can chill. I can chill. I'll give you an example. Back in the 1980s up in New Jersey, there's a big push in public schools to teach Ebonics. And you can imagine, who may have been in favor of that. African Americans were probably in favor of some of this, right? It's a cultural, historical thing. And then you had others, maybe many of them white people, and maybe even some black people who felt, no, Ebonics should not be taught. The official language is English. So I remember having a conversation with somebody, and they were like, "This is a stupid idea." And I said, "No, it's not." I said, as a matter of fact, it's a good idea. And they looked at me like, "What are you, crazy?" I said, "No, no, no. The shoe's on the other foot. Ebonics is a dialect." I told them, "I'm Italian. You know how many freaking dialects are in Italy? You go from one little paese to another, you don't know what they're talking about. But yet, they preserve that culture, that language. They preserve the way they dance, the songs they sing, the food they eat." I said, "So they teach it in school a little bit. They just should make it a point. It's not the official language. You cannot, like in Italy." I grew up understanding the dialect from Abruzzo. There's no way I could use my Abruzzese dialect in Italy and succeed, because the Italians would say, "Look, what are you, dumb? You can't speak formal Italian? Get out of here." That's what they would tell me in Italy. Matter of fact, I had a job interview years ago from a Northern Italian company up in Milan, and they picked out my accent and my dialect. So I was speaking Italian. Guy didn't really like me. I could tell. Why? Because I was from central or southern Italy. That's another story. But understand, don't always assume that you don't have a bias. You do. And always put the shoe on the other foot. And guess what? You'll come out better balanced, and you'll be chill. And you won't be like in need of an antidepressant, right? Or some kind of like crazy athletic event, like jumping out of a plane to get. Now, I know Dr. Potter's done that in her life. Now, I don't mean anything bad, but you know what I'm saying? Trying to get those endorphins going. You don't have to go bungee jumping, right? Just chill a bit and think about it rationally. Be a critical thinker. And again, the last point is avoiding a double standard. And why do we talk about all this? Because in financial management, it's going to take ethics, personal ethics, to help us improve financial reporting. I won't go into many things, but you know the pressures we're under. I've had students in federal government in my classes tell me they've had their bosses tell them to do unethical things at work, to post transactions to certain accounts that they knew were wrong. Okay? So let's not kid ourselves. These things happen. Okay? Can you reimagine what the world would be if we all improved our ethics a little bit? On the job, at home. Just think about it. You know, start with yourself. As you think about improving financial management, reporting, the decision making, start with yourself. Okay? So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly enjoy it. We're an intellectual conversation here, intellectually honest. And I hope that this has added value to you. It's been wonderful sitting with you from lessons 4 through 6. If you got any questions, please go to Dr. Potter to reach out to me. But I am your friendly face app assistant director, Dom Savini, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in your career. If you ever meet me at a conference or catch me, stop me and say hello. Okay? With that being said, I'm going to sign off as best as I can and wish you farewell. Okay? Stay well, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.